There's an old joke about a rabbi who stands in front of his congregation and says, "Allow me to say a few words before I begin speaking." I'm going to be that rabbi today. Before I begin, Rachel and I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to everyone for the incredible outpouring of good wishes and mazel tovs as we celebrate our son's Ari's bar mitzvah 2 weeks ago today. And including in the procession just now, it's so wonderful to hear all those mazel tovs. I won't say anything about the comments about a certain game that I also heard when I went around in the Torah procession. But 2 weeks ago, it was a beautiful Shabbat, and we're so grateful for all of your good wishes. We've had the opportunity now to celebrate many simchas together, both for our family and for all of yours. And it really was incredible to feel all of those wonderful blessings, and for us to feel so blessed as part of this wonderful congregation. You know, after Ari was born, we had his bris right here on this bima. He loves it when I remind him of that. Rachel likes it even less. And at Rosh Hashanah that year, I spoke about how meaningful that day was. Y'all remember that sermon, right? It's only 13 years ago. But I guess for those who have joined us since then, let me summarize. I spoke about the idea behind the name of that ceremony, bris, or brit, which means covenant. The idea of brit is at the heart of what it means to be a Jew. It describes the holy relationships that are at the core of our Jewish identity. Our relationships with God, our families, our community, and our people. What does it take to build these britot, these relationships? Well, what does it take to build any relationship with a friend, a partner, a parent, or a child? Relationships take time, attention, support, listening, and love. But there is something else that's required in any relationship: compromise. Compromise builds trust and allows us to move forward. And while I think that most of us would agree that compromise is necessary in any personal relationship, it is often not seen that way in our world. Compromise is often looked down upon in our society. In politics, compromise is a bad word. Those who compromise are perceived as weak, wishy-washy, and having no backbone. And it can seem like those who are most uncompromising are rewarded with the most attention and often the most respect. Compromise is also not a great rallying cry. This summer when I was in Israel, marching in the protests for democracy in the streets of Jerusalem, I didn't hear anyone chanting, "Compromise, compromise." That certainly would not have inspired hundreds of thousands of Israelis to take to the streets for the last 37 straight weeks. Conviction brings people out. Compromise does not. Religious groups are also losing their desire for compromise. Today, the two fastest growing religious affiliations are at the extremes. People are either gravitating to the most religious side of the spectrum or to the least, which is known as the nones. That's N-O-N-E-S, in case you're picturing something else. These are the people that describe themselves as having no religion. We see this not only in Judaism, but in other faiths as well. A conviction that unquestioning religious belief is the only way to be religious, or that religion has nothing to offer at all, has polarized the religious landscape. As we heard from Allison, TBS is bucking this trend. Our community is thriving both in numbers and in the quality of our educational programs and joyful experiences. One of the many reasons for this is the hard work we do to forge a compromise between tradition and modernity. Still, the larger religious culture matters. And in many religious communities, certitude is attracting members, and compromise is not. Politics, religion, really any aspect of our society today is polarized. Each side is certain that they are right, the other side is wrong, and not only that, the other side's ideas and beliefs are dangerous. Over the course of this year, deep concern about this polarization has come up over and over again. When there are such divergent views and the stakes feel so high, what can keep us from descending deeper and deeper into conflict? We feel it within our homes and our schools, with our friends and our families, our community, our country, in Israel, and around the world. Some are even asking if now we're in a pre-war era, a time when this polarization could lead to a broader conflict. We shudder at these questions, especially because the issues are so complicated, our world moves so fast, and people are so trapped in their echo chambers, there is little that we can do to stop it. Do you feel this way? Have you felt this way this past year or many years? As we come here today to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, the birthday of the world and our opportunity to begin again, we wonder, what kind of world are we celebrating? Can we really start over? Or have we gone too far? This summer, while studying at the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, I had a session with Dr. Tal Becker. Tal has been a lead negotiator for Israel for decades. Most recently, he was one of the main architects behind the Abraham Accords. Tal is no stranger to people with strongly held convictions, nor the acute challenges that exist in our world. It is because of all of this, Tal argued, that we need to reignite a passion for compromise. Now, it's important to understand what Tal means when he says compromise. For him, our passion for compromise is not for lazy compromise. It's not for a compromise we make simply because we can't be bothered to deal with the hard issues. Nor is it a compromise of tolerance, a compromise we make simply because we can't win, we can't get our way. Rather, we need to develop a passion for compromise as a value in and of itself. A compromise that is rooted in three things: humility, curiosity, and responsibility. Compromise from a greater sense of humility allows us to recognize that we alone don't hold all the answers. A greater sense of curiosity gives us a desire to listen and to learn so we can get to the best outcome. And finally, we also need a compromise that comes from a sense of responsibility to something greater than ourselves, to humanity, to our values, to our world, to future generations. This type of compromise, one that comes from a greater sense of humility, curiosity, and responsibility, is a holy compromise. And it is this type of compromise that we need more of in our world. It is holy because its process and its products strive to fulfill the highest values of our tradition. It's hard work, but it's necessary work. And it's work that we need to do today and throughout this new year. The good news is that we've already begun. On Rosh Hashanah, we seek to negotiate a holy compromise with God. Today is Yom Hadin, Judgment Day. Our tradition pictures God sitting in judgment over all of God's creatures. Nearly every single prayer in our machzor is an argument trying to convince God not to judge us only by the strictest standards of justice. If that were the case, then none of us would come out looking so good. We all have made mistakes this past year, done things and said things that we regret. So we pray to God over and over again to temper God's divine justice with rachamim, mercy. What is mercy? Mercy is showing compassion even when someone might not deserve it. Today and throughout the high holy days, we seek to make this compromise with God. Temper that justice with mercy, O God, and we promise to do better this year. Rosh Hashanah teaches us not only that compromise is possible, but that compromise can be holy. Today we seek a holy compromise with God. And if we're asking God to judge us with mercy, then shouldn't we do the same for others? How have you judged others over this past year? By a simple standard of what you believe is right and what is wrong? Knowing right from wrong is important, but for our relationships to work, we have to mix this with a sense of rachamim, mercy, rachmanis, as we'd say in Yiddish. Even when we are convinced that we are right, we need to ask ourselves if that is what we really want. Do we want to be right, or do we want to be in relationship? Do we want to be right, or do we want to be without someone who we care about? Today we resolve to seek holy compromises with those we have hurt and who have hurt us over this past year. Rosh Hashanah teaches us that it is possible to achieve holy compromise even with those with whom we disagree. There is a powerful symbol of this that you all walked past this morning when you walked out of your homes and when you walked through our doors at TBS. Any idea what it is? That's right, a mezuzah. I pulled this off of my front door this morning. How do we hang a mezuzah on our doorpost? Not vertically or horizontally, but diagonally. Diagonally. This is the result of a holy compromise. In the Shema, we say that we should write the words about how we love God al mezuzot beitecha, on the doorpost of our home. But the Torah doesn't tell us how exactly to do that. About 1,000 years ago, the great commentator Rashi said, the way we do that is to hang the mezuzah vertically, straight up and down. But 2 generations later, his grandson, Rabbeinu Tam, said no. He disagreed with his grandfather, and he said, we actually hang our mezuzah horizontally. You think it's only your family that argues about family traditions. Soon after that, another rabbi named Yaakov ben Asher came along and said, hey, we can compromise. He suggested we split the difference, literally, by hanging our mezuzot diagonally. This holy compromise has become our custom to this day. The next time you walk through a doorway and see a mezuzah hung diagonally, remember this holy compromise. It teaches us that when we disagree, and even when members of our family disagree, it is possible to find a way to honor both sides. Our diagonal mezuzot are symbols of holy compromise. Now, I know it's not yet Yom Kippur, but I have a confession to make. At this point of writing the sermon, I got a little stuck. So I decided to listen to the advice of a friend who told me that I try reaching out to Claude. Have you heard of Claude? Claude is a next-generation AI assistant for all of your tasks. So I went to claude.ai, you can check it out after the holiday, and I typed in Rosh Hashanah sermon on holy compromise, and a lovely little sermon came out. Most of it I had already covered, I swear, but Claude did make an excellent point. He wrote, and I quote, holy compromise does not mean compromising our morals or truths. And when I read this, I thought, uh-oh, I hope Claude doesn't go to rabbinical school. But being passionate about holy compromise does not mean that we don't have convictions. There are certainly values that we must never compromise on, especially in today's environment. We must never compromise on our conviction that anti-Semitism is dangerous, and we must stand up to it no matter where it comes from. That's why I'm proud that our Social Advocacy Committee is partnering with the ADL to pioneer a working group to address anti-Semitism in our community. We also must never compromise on our conviction that the state of Israel, even with all of its challenges, is an unbelievable blessing for the Jewish people. When I marched in those protests in Israel this past summer, I joined hundreds of thousands of Israelis waving Israeli flags. And just like them, it is exactly because of our commitment to Israel that we'll talk more at Kol Nidre about what we can do to help ensure a thriving Jewish and democratic future for our Jewish homeland. We also must never compromise in our conviction that our tradition, that Judaism, matters. Our Jewish values root us and guide us in this complicated and polarized world. Our Jewish community gives us a sense of belonging when too many people feel lonely today. Our connection to the Jewish people around the world ties us to something bigger than ourselves. It is our conviction that Judaism matters that underlies all of our other commitments. All of these convictions are important, but the truth is that even our convictions can involve compromise. This is something that Tal Becker pointed out in Jerusalem. Conviction often involves some sort of compromise. A conviction that personal liberty is paramount can mean compromising on public safety. A conviction that observing Shabbat is an important mitzvah can mean compromising on what you can do on a Saturday. A conviction about having Sholom Bayit, a peaceful home, can mean compromising our own views. That's how it works in my house. Rachel and I compromise all the time. I admit I'm wrong, and she agrees with me. I'm here all week. Even when we have a strong conviction, holding on to that conviction often means that we're compromising on something else. And this doesn't make us weak or indecisive. It makes us human. We are all doing the best we can to balance everything and everyone that matters to us. But it's hard to balance it all. So we do our best to find this holy compromise. Humility, curiosity, and a sense of responsibility help guide us forward in knowing which compromises to make and which convictions to keep. Here's a story from our tradition about holy compromise. It happened about 2,000 years ago while the Second Temple in Jerusalem was under siege by the Roman army. This, too, was a polarized time. The Jewish people were torn apart by opposing factions, extreme sides that were uncompromising in their opinions as to how Jews should respond to the Roman occupation of Jerusalem. The wealthy Sadducees said that we should just learn to live with the status quo. The Essenes said, let's just go to the desert and escape and leave it all behind. The Zealots said that the Jews should fight and rebel against the Roman army. The Talmud tells us that the Second Temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, which we usually translate as senseless hatred. But I heard a different understanding of this phrase from Professor Shira Billet of the Jewish Theological Seminary, who instead translated sinat chinam as civic enmity. The Jewish people had such animosity towards each other. They were so polarized and unable to compromise that it led to the destruction of the temple in Judaism as they knew it. It was a time that carries stark warnings for our world today. But there was another faction at this time called the Pharisees who would become the rabbis. Their leader was Yochanan ben Zakkai, who decided to seek a holy compromise with the Romans. While in the walls of a besieged Jerusalem, he faked his death, was carried out in a coffin, and once he got outside the walls of the city, he went up to the Roman general Vespasian, and after a bit of flattery, offered a compromise. Tein li Yavne v'chochameha, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, give me Yavne and my students, and we will leave Jerusalem. Yochanan ben Zakkai would go with his students to the backwater town of Yavne, about 40 miles west of Jerusalem, and Vespasian would have one less Jewish faction to fight. Vespasian accepted. Yochanan ben Zakkai and his students left, and soon after, the temple and the city were destroyed, along with thousands of men, women, and children within its walls. Is Yochanan ben Zakkai a hero, or is he a coward? His compromise left his fellow Jews behind. He abandoned the holiest place in the holiest city to an invading army. What kind of rabbi was he? What kind of a Jew compromises on such convictions? And yet, it is because Yochanan ben Zakkai left that we still have the Judaism that we have today. In Yavne, he created our Judaism, a Judaism after the temple was destroyed. Yochanan ben Zakkai had a conviction that the Jewish future must be preserved. For that to happen, he had to compromise on his Jewish present. It was a controversial decision, and no doubt an extremely difficult one for him to make. But if it wasn't for his holy compromise, none of us would be here today. What are the holy compromises that we need to make this year in our lives and in our world? We need a greater passion and appreciation for holy compromise in our society. especially as we move into a presidential election year, which we know will only contribute to even greater sense of division. We would do well to remember the words of Judge Learned Hand, one of the most admired jurists in U.S. history. 2 weeks before D-Day in 1944, Judge Hand addressed a crowd of people in Central Park for I'm an American Day. Listen to what he said. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. It is the spirit which seeks to understand the mind of other men and women, and which weighs their interests alongside its own without bias. For Judge Hand, uncompromising certitude is deadly to the preservation of democratic freedom and liberty. Almost 80 years later, his message still resonates. This spirit of liberty is missing from our political battles over guns and climate change and immigration and so many other hotly contested issues. We have all but forgotten how to reason together, how to keep our disagreements from devolving into sinat chinam, civic enmity. It can feel, as Boston Globe columnist Jeff Jacoby wrote, like our culture is fraying at the seams, and it won't knit itself back together. He's right. Our society won't repair itself. It takes us, each of us, to help fix what is frayed. When we live with a greater passion for holy compromise, we can help pull our relationships and our world back from the margins. One way to begin doing this is to stop viewing the world from the perspective only of liberals and conservatives or Republicans or Democrats. Rather, we have to start viewing things from the perspective of Judaism. Rosh Hashanah teaches us today that compromise can be holy. There are compromises that we make in our lives, compromises for careers, for family, for community. Our challenge is to make them holy compromises, not lazy compromises or compromises we make because we can't get our way, but compromises that come from a greater sense of humility, curiosity, and responsibility. But to achieve these holy compromises, we need something else: courage. It is not easy, especially in our world, to come down from our towers and to admit that there might be another way. But what is the story that we want to record in our books of life this year? That we were stuck in our corners, or that we found a way forward? That we were polarized, or that we compromised? Next Rosh Hashanah, what will your book of life say? There is a story about the great scholar, Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who before he was a great scholar, Rabbi Chaim was actually a pretty indifferent student who one day decided to abandon his studies. That night, after he decided to leave his yeshiva, he had a dream. In his dream, an angel came to him who was holding a beautiful stack of books. "Whose books are those?" Rabbi Chaim asked the angel. "They're yours," the angel said, "if only you have the courage to write them." Will we have the courage to write stories of holy compromise in our books of life this year? After services, when you sit down at your tables for lunch, talk about how you will write stories of holy compromise. Think about the prayers from our machzor that ask God to temper judgment with mercy. Point out your diagonal mezuzot and debate the story of Yochanan ben Zakkai. Share with your family and friends the holy compromises that you've made. What made them holy? How do they impact your relationships? What holy compromises should we be trying to make this year? Exactly 2 weeks ago, I stood right here, almost right at this time, speaking to my son at his bar mitzvah. And when I looked around the sanctuary that morning, like I look around it today, I see the blessings of Brit. I see the people with whom we have forged holy relationships. 2 weeks ago, I saw our parents and our siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins, old friends from Minneapolis and Chicago, from college and camp, friends from TBS and Kelman Brown Academy who have become like family. These holy relationships have benefited from moments of holy compromise. Think about your own relationships with parents and children, family, and friends. We have all had to make holy compromises over the years, and our relationships are stronger for it. Today, we too are challenged by the angel's response to Rabbi Chaim. Will we have the courage to mend our relationships and do what we can to fix our frayed society? Will we have the courage to forge holy compromises for our future? Will we have the courage to do what we can to make it a good and sweet new year for us, for our families, and for our world? I think we do. I think that you do. So this year, let's work on those holy compromises together. Shana Tova. We turn now back to our service. Page 123, we continue with Chatzi Kaddish.